All right, we are recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sovereign Artsakh, one of my two YouTube channels. And as you can already tell, we're not here alone. We've got somebody else on screen. This is a Zoom call I'm having with a reasonably new friend of mine. His name is Arthur, even though it looks like Artur.
That's the way my
Asadoriyan.
mom says it. I'll tell you that.
Oh yeah, okay, I'm sure, and I'm sure there are certain people in your life that's exactly how they refer to you. All right, well, Arthur and I are new friends. In fact, I kind of stalked him a little bit. His podcast or his YouTube channel came up on my feed since I'm obviously focused on all things Armenia and Artsakh, and I'm like, oh, who's this guy? I should watch that. And then he was also Actually, no. It was first you were a guest on another podcast. I
With
forget
Sam
the,
Shamoon.
what is it?
With Sam Shamoon.
I think that's it. Oh wait,
It was either that or David Wood.
it's the guy. His podcast is called Philosophy.
Act 17 Apologetics.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, so that's David Wood. Yeah.
Okay, that's the first one I saw, and I'm like, this guy's right up my alley, and he's Armenian. I got to find him. And then I found your podcast, and then I noticed that the very first guest on your podcast was a guy named J.P. Moreland. And so I knew I was a kindred soul, and we're not going to go into that now. Maybe I'll have you on again another time. We'll talk about J.P. Moreland. But he's had a profound influence on my life and my faith walk. So here on Sovereign Artsakh, part of my objective is to get sovereign recognition for the state, for statehood, for Artsakh, but that's also a kind of symbolic of justice. Period. Right? People need to be respected as individuals, and countries and belief systems and cultures need to be recognized by the like-minded people around the world. Like I think the United States of America needs to recognize sovereignty for Artsakh, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. I want you to tell me about your podcast first. That's the first thing I want to talk about. Tell me about your podcast, why you started it, what's it about. I know it's long form. You do long form interviews, and then you do some live. Well, I'll let you elaborate.
Sure. Yeah. So my YouTube channel is called Apologia Center. My organization is called Apologia Center, and we'll talk about that, how it was birthed and all that. But specifically, the channel has to do with Christian apologetics. And
Apologetics. Are you sorry for being a Christian?
Yeah, I know. We just go around apologizing, right? For those who are not familiar, apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, and it means to give a defense or a reason.
Second Peter?
Yeah, 3:15, right? Yeah. 1 Peter 3:15.
1 Peter 3:15.
And so we are called as Christians to have a proper response. Let's put it there. I don't like to complicate this stuff because I don't think it is complicated. And when you look at it in the biblical context, Peter's not writing to a bunch of philosophers and theologians. He's writing to your average Christian saying, you're in the midst of persecution and take your persecution well, right? Don't repay evil with evil. Don't be like that. And always be prepared in the midst of all this. Always be prepared to give a reason or to give a defense for those who ask you for the hope that you have. And so there's all sorts of apologetics channels, by the way, and they're amazing and great. And I benefit from them. I watch them. I learn from them. My channel is specifically kind of geared towards worldview formation. Okay, so like you could do an apologetic channel where you just talk about philosophy, right? Like philosophical arguments for God's existence.
Right.
And I love that stuff, and that's beautiful. But I think as good as that is, what about Christians and politics, right? What about Christians and being a father and a husband? Like for me, that's all apologetics.
Living it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's everything's coming through this filter of your Christian identity, your Christian worldview. The way I treat my gardener is a part of my Christian worldview. The way I run my business, all of that, my relationships, my family members, all of that. So for me, those are all a part of the world of apologetics. Now, some people might not say it's that broad. They might actually, want to narrow description of it, and that's okay. That's fine. I just for my channel, I try to aim it at all of those issues. I do interviews, which I haven't since I've gotten back from Armenia, and resettling has taken much longer than I expected.
I want to ask about that later. Yeah.
Yeah, and but there's interviews with scholars and theologians and thinkers. There's live discussions I have with the audience, so they're basically Q&As. I don't prepare for them really. I jump on there and people ask questions and we answer them. And then I make short videos of stuff going on in our culture. So if something kind of pops up on my radar, I see it trending, or people are talking about it, I say, okay, let me make a video on this. And if I have something to say about it that I think is worth hearing.
Great. And those the live discussions or Q&As that you have, you post those later, right? It's like you do it live and then they're live on YouTube and they get posted automatically. Yeah, I'm going to get around to that. My Wi-Fi connection at home is pretty bad. In fact, that's why I'm in this location. Whenever I want to do a live interview or Zoom chat with somebody and I want the quality to come through without interruption, I come to this location. So I'll get that figured out eventually. In fact, people on my channel here have requested it or asked about it. Will you ever do live? And I absolutely want to do that. I want to do it daily, maybe someday, eventually. But before we move on, I want you to, well, first subscribe to this channel and subscribe, like, comment, click the notification bell. Did I leave anything out? Oh yeah, share this video. But also go to Arthur's YouTube channel, and it is what?
Apologia Center.
APALOGIACENTER.
Yes.
Find it, and you'll see his face there. And subscribe there, and share, and like, and comment, and click the notification bell, etc. There. Commercial over. We got to get that done, right? We just got to. We also have a common friend, Jacob Persley. He's the first guest I've had on this YouTube channel, and so you are the honorable second guest. But his was a shorter interview. I broke his up, but we're going to do the full thing. I'm going to post the full thing today, and I want you to explain why January 6th is Christmas Day for Armenians. But before that, give me a brief bio of yourself. We'll get into Nagorno Karabakh and Artsakh and the conflict there. I want to hear from you firsthand, especially since you lived there for so long. I want to get it straight from you. But first, give me a brief bio, and then tell me why Christmas is January 6th.
Sure. So I was born in Armenia. I was born in 1985. I was born in Echmiadzin, which is, for those who know Armenia, who know Armenian religious kind of centers. Yeah. Echmiadzin happens to be the religious center. It's the Holy See. It's the Vatican of the Armenian Apostolic Church.
The first Christian cathedral ever built, right? It's still standing. It's still standing.
It's still functional.
Yeah, I've been in it. It's incredible.
It is, huh?
What year was that? Like, how old is it?
So I think it was completed in 305 or 303, one of those.
So it does go back 1700
yeah.
years. I didn't know if it was like 100 years later or after Christianity came.
Yeah, don't take that to the bank, but I would guess, yeah, it's definitely not into the 400s.
Sorry to cut you off, but that's something that just boggles my mind. As a Christian, that should be like common knowledge to the 2.4 billion Christians on the planet, that the first Christian cathedral is in Armenia, still standing. It should be like Mecca to Christians. But
it definitely should be. And those, it's like a little gem for those who find it and go. And obviously the cathedral has structures that have been built on. Yeah. There's a seminary there and all that stuff.
I have drone footage of it, so I'll post some of that.
Oh, it's beautiful, right? Yeah. And it gets renovated and fixed up. But so I was born in Echmiadzin, and my parents are actually born and raised in Iran. So my parents migrated and that takes my ancestry to basically from the 1600s, being in Iran. And from what I can gather, and because there's a connection here on what we're going to talk about, from what I can gather, my ancestry essentially is from Nakhichevan. A lot of Iranian Armenians who were taken to Iran by Shahbaz in the 1600s were from Nakhichevan.
Is that little section of Azerbaijan or no? Where is
Yeah, that's the Autonomous Republic of Azerbaijan.
Right, right. Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
however you want to say it, it
Yeah, yeah.
is. And it's, it's landlocked, right? It's got a border with Turkey, but it doesn't have a border with Azerbaijan.
Well, the way I
And
describe it, so I've done this on my channel, is when you see a picture of Armenia and Azerbaijan from above, obviously on the map, that looks like the arm of Azerbaijan reaching underneath Armenia as Azerbaijan is trying to consume Armenia.
that's interesting.
Because the tail where Baku is out in the Caspian Sea looks like a tail. And so that's the back end of the monster Azerbaijan, or the lapdog of Turkey, the way I refer to it, trying to consume. And then the mouth is opened up right around Lake Savan. It looks like a monster wrapping its arm around Armenia, trying to consume it. So that's
very interesting. I've never. That's good.
so your family is your
my ancestry is
history.
from Nakhichevan, and so my parents went to Armenia in 1984. I was born in 85, and obviously Armenia was under communist rule during those years, and we were in Armenia when the Soviet Union fell. I remember that actually. I was 4 or 5 years old. I remember it. I remember certain images pretty vividly about the celebration in the streets and all that stuff. And then we migrated to the United States in the mid 90s, so 95. I was about 10, 11 years old. I was not brought up in a believing household in the way I think Protestant evangelicals, and I think biblically we would assume what it means to be believing. Generally speaking, my parents weren't atheists. I put it that way, okay? But they were very nominal. So I wasn't like brought up with Christian identity. Mm-hmm. I was brought up with the Armenian identity, and to a certain extent, that meant Christian. And we probably I'm sure we'll come to some of those points. So when I was 17 years old, I was a senior in high school. I started questioning kind of life, meaning, religion, God's existence. And as I searched, and the interesting thing is that I was pretty infatuated with Islam. And this is 2002, 2003. And I was pretty interested in Islam because to me it looked like Muslims took their faith very seriously, and I didn't really see any Christians taking their faith seriously. And in the process of that, met some friends, got a hold of a Bible, started reading it, and I was just blown away with specifically the Gospels, because it was completely different than everything else I'd been reading. And there were some Hindu texts I was reading, Quranic texts I was reading, right? And it was different. There's something different about the biblical text. And so I started going to church. I gave my life to Christ. I said, I want to follow you with everything I have, pretty much. So 2003, October of 2003. And went to Bible college, went to seminary, been in ministry since then in all sorts of ways. And about 3 years ago, about 3 years ago, met some friends. They invited me to go to Armenia, which I rejected at first. They found out I was into apologetics, and this friend said, she said, please, we really need it in Armenia. Nobody does apologetics in Armenia. We really, really need it. Come to Armenia. And I said, no, it's not happening. That was my very fast initial reaction. But we planned a missionary trip to Armenia to do apologetics specifically with a team of 4. Some of my friends, we went, we did it. And it just happened that we did that during the Velvet Revolution in Armenia. It wasn't planned. We had planned our stuff. That's what happened.
Oh, it was planned.
Yeah, I didn't plan. I didn't plan it. I would say so. I would agree with you, but we didn't plan on being there during the revolution, because that made life a bit hard. Since everybody was shutting the streets down, we would go places. We didn't have a guarantee if we were going to make it back on time. Can you to our meetings?
Some of my viewers have no idea what the Velvet Revolution is. Just briefly.
Sure. Yeah. So there was recently there was a revolution in Armenia called the Velvet Revolution, led by Nikol Pashinyan, who's the current prime minister of Armenia. And basically, it was a revolution. It was a peaceful revolution. That's what makes it stand out, that people weren't beaten and killed and all that stuff. And the populace pretty much rose up against the powers in Armenia and said, well, there's been too much corruption over the last 20, 30 years, and we're kind of sick and tired of that. And yeah, it led to the whole parliament being disbanded and then re-elected. Almost like entirely the ruling party was voted out. About 85% of it, I think.
And you went from a president to a prime minister?
No, that had been done a year. The constitution had been changed a year before.
Okay.
Where the power, or the president still is there,
right?
But it doesn't have the presidency doesn't have the power that it once did, and the prime minister.
It's kind of like a monarch, right? Like
it's a parliamentarian system.
Got it.
Right. So it's very, very European in that way. The way European countries run their, government.
Got it.
So yeah, we were there during that time, and then we came back, and I just started losing sleep over it, and I think God was telling us, hey, you should go to Armenia and do this apologetic stuff. So I told my wife, she prayed. I said, hey, I'm convinced I want to go, but obviously, we had just had our third child, so about a month old when this was happening. And I said, why don't you pray about it and see what God is saying? And 2 weeks later, she came to me, and to my surprise, by the way, and said, yeah, I think this is what God wants us to do. So we were in Armenia in February of that year. About 6 months later, we're, moved to Armenia, and we were there for about a year and a half, and just moved back in September before the war started.
Oh, yeah. All right. Oh, it is that recent. Yeah. When I talked to you last time, I didn't remember when you would come back. So you came back just before that.
Right before it.
Well, before we talk about Armenian Christmas, why don't we launch into that right now, since that is kind of the focus of a lot of my videos on here, is that conflict. I mean, I started this whole channel because of that. I mean, not just because of that, but because I've been researching this subject, and then that happened. And I just got to do whatever I can to spread the word. I'm not Armenian, but I am Christian. And that's what brings me to this. I mean, Armenia is its own, there's concentric circles, right? There's the Armenians, and then there are Christians. It's a larger concentric circle. And I'm a part of this huge group that most of them have no idea about Armenia and the religious, it's basically my history. Even though I'm not Armenian, because of it being like the first Christian nation, that's a part of my personal heritage. And it's like, how can I get Christians to know that? And it's like, well, I'll start a YouTube channel, just start talking about it. And so tell me about this conflict. Tell me everything. I mean, I'm sure we don't have time for that, but what's going on? What is your point of view, and the current political upheaval in Armenia?
Yeah. So, like I said, in growing up in the 80s, and because we got to go back that far, at least, to talk about this.
Yeah, right.
When the Soviet Union fell, obviously, whenever something like that happens, there's a vacuum, right, of power. It's like, what happens to these unresolved issues that they were holding, kind of in a control. Right. So the Soviet Union had made some decisions in the 1920s, and I'd say Stalin had made decisions in the 1920s, 21 and 23, where Nakhichevan was pretty much thrown into Azerbaijan. The Republic of Azerbaijan was created in 1918 and didn't last very long until the Soviets took it over. And because of war going on between Armenia and Turkey, this is right World War I and post-World War I. Armenians had lost a bunch of land. That if anybody is interested to look into this treaty, they can look up the Kars Treaty or the Kars Treaty, KRS, and just look at it. You read a couple of Wikipedia stuff, you'll know kind of generally what happened. And what Stalin decided to do was put Artsakh, right, Nagorno-Karabakh, into Azerbaijan, into the borders of Azerbaijan. Now, At the same time, he didn't include them in the Republic of Azerbaijan because they're ethnic Armenians there. And they were trying to get unification with Armenia when the Bolsheviks took over this whole region,
right,
in the Caucasus. And so Artsakh was its own territory. So in the Russian Empire, let me put it that well, maybe Russian Empire might confuse some people with the actual Russian Empire, but in the Communist Empire,
right,
in the Soviet Union, there were republics and there were territories. So Armenia and Azerbaijan, Georgia were republics.
right.
Nakhichevan, Artsakh were territories. So they had their own Soviet, they had their own governing party.
Like unincorporated territories, not, yeah.
So they're within the borders, but they're not within the country, right? This creates all sorts of complications. I mean, why anybody would do something like this? The only thing I can guess at, maybe an educated guess, somewhat educated, is, you divide and conquer. You don't want people in this region being unified and connected together, because that's going to lead to revolution at one point or another. The Assyrians are doing this when they ship people, they would take over land and then get a bunch of the population and ship them completely somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because you don't want people connected to that. So this has been done throughout history. As a matter of fact, one thing a lot of people don't know is that when the Russian Empire fell, pre-communist, pre-Bolsheviks, there was an attempt at creating a federation in the Caucasus that included Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. So it would have been a country, right? It was a federation. So these three countries would have been like one country with their own representation and stuff. And that obviously didn't work out. But there was an attempt at that. So I guess, like, looking at this history, I would say the reason Stalin would have done this, and I've been going through a book on Stalin, by the way. That's a really, really good book. I'm doing the audiobook, but it's phenomenal. It's a 3-series book. 2 of them have come out. The third one's not out yet. And goes into details, very, very important, firsthand kind of details about his life. And again, I would say the only thing I could say is that this guy understood how to rule. He understood what it means to be in power, and throwing Artsakh into Azerbaijani territory, but not giving the Azeris actual rule over the territory, would have kept things divided enough for him to do his job. So,
and while they were
go ahead,
for decades under the Soviet bloc, they're not going to fight with each other while they're ruled by this.
No.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, they lived pretty, you could say, harmoniously for most of that period of time. There was Azeris living in Armenia, living in Yerevan, Echmiadzin. There was obviously villages, and that kind of has come back now into the conversation. There are Armenians living in Baku. And which led in the 80s when all this thing started falling apart, when communism, right, it led to the Sumgait massacres. Large portions of Armenians living in Azerbaijan were massacred and killed. So all of this kind of started in the 80s, and the fighting went on. 94, there was a ceasefire declared, which would have been the Armenians were on the victorious end, right? Like they took those 7 regions around Artsakh, and the borders kind of were, I guess, drawn, if we can use that kind of language. Not internationally recognized,
right?
But for all practical reasons, purposes, they were drawn. There's no Azeris past that. It was
they won the war.
Armenians.
That's the territory they gained, the bounty from the spoils of the war, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's been a ceasefire since then. There's been skirmishes and clashes, obviously, throughout those years. But in July, there was fighting that in the Tavush region, which is in Armenia proper, which was very uncommon. It's like, wait, why is there fighting going on in this region? Usually it's in Artsakh, right? Artsakh being its own independent governing system, by the way. For those who don't know, Artsakh has its own president. so they have self-determination. They want self-determination. They're ruling themselves. And so the fighting going on in Armenia was kind of like, okay, this is strange. Why is this happening? And then in September, the full-on battle started. The full-on war started.
Let me back up a little bit. So July, there was some hostilities or some conflict that flared up. What region was that?
Tavush.
And is that in Azerbaijan?
It's northern. No, Tavush is in Armenia. I forget the Azeri name for that region. It's very close.
Is there a road? Because when I was there,
yes. If you've gone to Georgia or gone up north,
I went to Georgia, went to Tbilisi. So I went through that region.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I actually have footage of it and I'll post it on my channel at some point, where I'm talking to my driver. In fact, my driver used to work for the president of Armenia. And I was saying, so technically there could be a sniper right over there and a bullet could come through this window. And he's like, yep. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. He goes, right now we're in Azerbaijan and right now we're back in Armenia. I was like, oh, okay. So that's the region. It's interesting because it actually goes
really close to the border. That road goes really close to the border.
Yeah, he says technically you cross it. I mean, since it's disputed or whatever, technically you cross at one point. He goes, is it this turn or is it that turn? It's like, I think we're in Azerbaijan right now and now we're back, whatever. But I posted a video recently about a church that was burned. Arsonists attacked a church in San Francisco in July.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been about the same time. Right. And it was clearly anti-Armenian because they broke in. There were actually two separate locations. One was a church that was burned. Another was Armenian school or something. And it was not just random hoodlums. It was Turks and Azeris. Yeah,
absolutely. It's very clear that these attacks were racist in nature and they were aimed at Armenians. It wasn't like some bunch of hoodlums, a bunch of young kids who were like, hey, that's a nice property, let's deface it or something like that. It was very clearly anti-Armenian. So yes, it is because of that conflict that started in July where there was all sorts of clashes between Armenians and Azeris in different places in the United States. Remember globally, as a matter of fact, because I remember them stuff being in Paris, there's stuff in New York, there's stuff in DC, there's stuff in LA, obviously. So yeah, it got pretty tense. I remember making a video and I actually had Sam Shamoun on my channel and we spoke about the Islamic mindset, the Turkish mindset. And part of the reason why I decided to have Sam on to talk about this was because of the conversion of the Hagia Sophia into a mosque.
Right.
Right. Again, going back to your comments about Christian heritage and stuff like that, and I would say apologetics in the worldview kind of sense. For a lot of Western folks looking at this, it just goes over their heads. They're clueless as to what's happening because they don't understand worldviews in general. So they're looking at it and say, oh, so what? Some guy took a really old church that was a museum and converted it into a mosque. It's their country. They can do whatever they want. Well, not necessarily, right? The Hagia Sophia was the center of Christendom, Byzantine Christendom, for a very long time. And it's Greek in identity. And again, you can't talk about Turks, Armenians without talking about, Greeks and Assyrians as well, because they're all
Constantinople. I mean, it's like people don't realize that.
Yes, exactly.
That's the center of Christianity for a long time.
And the Christian-Muslim conflict. People have been saying, and we've been making these videos, and we, I get folks that come on my channel and say, oh, you're turning this into a religious issue, and it's not a religious issue, it's a political one. My response is usually anything that has to do with Islam is a political and religious issue. You just can't,
inseparable.
If you don't get that, then you don't understand Islam.
Yeah.
Okay. Not saying you don't understand Muslims, you just don't understand Islam because that's the way the religion is. Yeah. So when Erdogan converted the Hagia Sophia, started having services in there, right? They had their call to prayer and all that stuff. I had Sam Shamoun on and we were talking about what does this mean? Because from a historic Muslim perspective, this is a sign of conquest.
Yeah.
It is to show we've conquered these people. Look, their holy sites have become our holy sites. There is this understanding that is still alive in the world, that if some place was a holy site, kind of continues to be a holy site, even though the religious kind of
Always.
identity and all stuff changes. So, so we're like, this is interesting. What's going on? There was leaked documents that spoke about Turkey planning in 2003 to invade Armenia and Greece. And so this stuff was all coming together. We're saying, okay, it's getting really tense, and it doesn't seem like it's just Azerbaijan that's instigating this stuff just because of the territorial stuff. It seems like they have a huge backing by Turkey, that Turkey is going to get involved in this conflict, which it previously really had not been involved. Obviously, in the sense now we know post-war, if we can call it that, that they were involved with arms, with hiring mercenaries from Syria, from sending their own special forces to fight. So they were heavily invested and involved in this conflict. And I think that could possibly be part of the whole plan of Erdogan, in whatever his ideology is, which I would say it's a pan-Turkic ideology. It's pan-Turkism.
Yeah, pan-Turanism, is that the same thing? I've not in my research, and like that's the phrase I hear, pan-Turanism, from the First World War.
Yeah, so this was birthed in the around the First World War, around that time period. This idea of reconnecting all the Turkic people groups. Right. Yeah, and
Armenia is in the way,
stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
And so the war took place. Armenia lost very clearly. The Russians got involved, which, depending who you ask, when they should have and how they should have and all that stuff, whether the Russians were playing a political game themselves and what was going on with that. But right now, as we speak, those territories have either been conquered or handed back to the Azeris, including the region of Hadrut, which is a part of Artsakh, and Shushi, which the Azeris called Shusha. And recently I read that they've declared Shushi as the center of their cultural heritage, which this stuff is always funny to me because, like it's funny and sad in the sense that, they're inventing history. Right. They're rewriting history of, that stuff bothers me so much, because the furthest they can take it back is maybe 300 years. If we really, really push it, ethnic kind of groups and stuff, maybe 1,000 years. Right. But it just doesn't compare to Armenians going back 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years in that region, especially in those places.
Let me interrupt real quick on that note, because there's something I've been meaning to post on this channel, and eventually I will, but I was reading the memoir of Armin Garo. So he's, some people will be familiar with Armin Garo. He was the first U.S. ambassador or Armenian ambassador to the United States. He was also significant in Operation Nemesis. He was also involved in the Ottoman Bank siege, which there's lots of history here. So Armin Garo in his memoir talks about his last meeting with Talat Pasha, and they get into a heated discussion, or Armin Garo is heated under the collar and is silent because there's two other people in the room that are having discussions. And finally, Talat asks Armin Garo, why you're so silent? And Armin was suspicious of what Talat had up his sleeve, regarding, eliminating the Armenians. This was literally a month before World War I broke out. And Armin Garo goes on this kind of a rant, and he says, you guys think you can eliminate us. You guys think you can wipe us out. I just traveled all through that region of my country. And you know what? I crossed 3 bridges, and 2 of them were built by ancient bridges built by Armenians. And the third one was built by the Mongols. I didn't see any Turkish bridges, or I didn't see any cultural heritage sites or significant, signs of your history in that whole region. 2 of them were ancient Armenian bridges, and 1 was a Mongolian bridge. So
yeah, isn't that interesting?
Like inventing history today. This is our ancient, Azerbaijani ancient history goes back 100 years maybe. Right?
Yeah, and usually when you speak about these things, and there's all keyboard warriors and all that stuff. Um,
I got plenty of them. And they're going to be commenting on this video.
yeah, there's a very funny, it's funny-ish in the sense that it's the Pashinyan, when he became prime minister, he had some meeting. It was kind of brokered in Europe and stuff, and he's sitting down talking with Aliyev. And Aliyev makes this comment about, in that region, there were, in the Khanates, these Khanates were there, the Persians has established and stuff. And he names some Azeri governor of that region. And I don't know, like 200-300 years ago. And Pashinyan's response is, when Tigran the Great was making deals with Pompey, there was no people group as the Azeris on the face of the planet. And again, people groups come and go. People groups come and go. That's fine. Listen, we don't have issues with that. Especially as a Christian, no issues with that, because but it's when we completely ignore and when we falsify history and say, no, it's not them, it was us. And we've seen a lot of stuff like that, right? Like churches, Armenian churches, Azeris are claiming were built by their ancient ancestors. The Caucasian Albanians built those churches, and it was all theirs. Even though the writing on the walls is 400-500 years, 1,000 years old, and it's Armenian. It's not any other language. And so you can't falsify stuff like that. But hey, they do it, and their people listen to them. That's the sad reality of this. And my conversation in the online format, with Azeris has been very difficult, because I just feel like I'm talking to a brick wall. It's that they're not going and researching the history.
Well, just so you know, I have a team of people, like loyal followers of this channel, that are in my comment section that they go back and forth. I have one particular Azeri. I don't know if he's Turkish or Azeri or what the difference is necessarily, but there's one in particular. But there's a couple of detractors, bots or trolls or whatever that are in there. And I got my loyal guys. And the things that you're saying, it's like when I go and read, every now and then I spend time reading comments, and you're on target. It's exactly the things they're saying. And it just always, it's like the truth is knowable, right? In one sense, we're designed as truth detectors.
That's right.
You can't know the truth unless you know all the worldviews or all the points of view, right? And unless you know what is reliable and what isn't. Like we're designed as humans with a sense, a discernment. And so like 2 + 2 = 4, once you see that, right? You see it, you never unsee it, right? It's always there. And, but Goebbels, right? The propaganda, the Nazi propagandist, the quote I always use is that you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. And so you've got an entire, at least a century of Turkish denialism, of historical revisionism, and you've got generations that have come up. And it's, in one sense, you can't even blame these guys for believing this, because they're surrounded, they're immersed in these cultures where even if it's like they're terrified to even think that they could be wrong, because they would be ostracized or even killed for speaking. I mean, they would have to literally change their whole lives. If they thought the truth, if they believed the truth.
It's very interesting. I saw like this short clip of an interview recently of this prisoner of war. There was all for all exchange, right? This prisoner of war Azeri guy, older gentleman, was sent back to Azerbaijan, and they were interviewing him. And the guy interviewing him is leading him on with questions, right? So he's putting words in his mouth as he's asking the question. He's pretty much like, so tell us, I'm paraphrasing here. So he says something like, tell us, how these Armenian fascists were, torturing you and stuff. And this gentleman says, he kind of sidesteps the question and says, well, I was in the hospital, and there was young nurses and old nurses and doctors that were helping me, and they were doing the job of doctors. They cared for me. They treated me well. And he says, even some of them had been doctors in Baku. So this is right. Some of his doctors were probably pretty old. And he says they even put chocolate in my pocket and stuff like that from time to time. So he completely, it's so crazy because he was just putting, tell us about these fascists, who hate Turks and we just want to kill them.
Right. They're trying to get sound bites for their
Yeah,
propaganda.
and he says, hey, they were doctors. They cared for me the way a doctor is supposed to care for you, regardless, right? Regardless, if you're hurt, a doctor has certain kind of moral duties and responsibilities to care for you, even if they don't like you very much. That doesn't matter. The morality there goes beyond that. So yeah, I mean, the current upheaval in Armenia, obviously in any country, I think you're going to get individuals who are opportunists, and then you're going to get individuals after a great loss who are hurt and angry. And so that's what's going on in Armenia right now. There's a good amount of casualties. I think the official number is in the 5,000 or 6,000 dead.
Wow.
And we I don't even know how many have been wounded, but everyone I talk to in Armenia tells me about someone they know who's either been killed or wounded. So that it's a good amount of people that have been definitely hurt, and families that have been hurt. And there's political parties that want Pashinyan out of office. They want him to resign immediately. There's protests going on. There's obviously people who've lost family members, I would guess, are part of those groups. And then there's people who aren't, who want him to stay in power because they're saying, okay, if this guy resigns, who's going to come into power?
Yeah.
And it seems to be the case. I think the last I heard was Pashinyan was saying that he wants to have snap elections in May or something like that. So now with the war, it's over and it's not, right? Like the fighting has stopped.
Yeah.
Is it over? Not really. When you look at that document that they've signed, which is not a treaty, it's nothing like that. It's just a document, whatever that means. Whether it be ratified and kind of officially taken on to be a treaty of sorts, I don't know what the future is going to hold. But there is Russian peacekeepers. This is the very ironic thing. The Russia could not have soldiers in that region, by the way, because they were a Minsk member. So the United States, Russia, North France could have actual boots on the ground in Nagorno-Karabakh because they were supposed to be the countries that were brokering this, the resolution of this issue. Mike Pompeo got up during the conflict, during the war, and said, we recommend that Scandinavian peacekeepers be taken to the region and planted there. And I don't know, I would think it was maybe a week or 2 weeks later, this document is signed and Russian peacekeepers flood into that region, a place where they had no military, presence. Now they have a big military presence. What that looks like in geopolitics and all that stuff, I don't know. Looking at Russia and the Crimean situation, the Abkhazia and Ossetia situation, and their conflicts with Georgia, and again these indigenous people group lands. It's very interesting to say the least.
Yeah.
So the document is signed for 5 years, and it can be extended for another 5 years. But if the countries decide they want the Russians out, they can get them out and continue fighting pretty much. Azerbaijan has won, so they're on kind of a high of sorts. They're doing military parades, and they're parading around their weapons and their drones and all that stuff that they've used. All the stuff they were denying is coming to the surface, that no, it was like that. They were denying that there was Turkish soldiers, and then during their military parade, you see guys with Turkish flags patched onto their arms walking around, special units. And Erdogan was there, and right, they did this whole thing,
Quoting that poem.
Yeah, exactly. And quoting what's his name, right? Like this stuff much better than I do because you're researching and doing research in that area.
Praised
Enver Pasha, right?
Yeah, I did
an architect of the Armenian genocide.
He gets praised, right?
Right? Like I don't like what would be the equivalent of
Heil Hitler.
Yeah, like that's exactly what it would be, right? Like, I don't know, like if it's not Hitler, like you get up and you say, oh, Himmler, what an amazing,
right.
You bring in some quotes from Himmler about Jews or something like that. Like, it's insane. It's crazy that the world just kind of says, okay, we're just going to continue and not pay attention to what's going on. And they should
flagged my video by saying that, what I said.
What was that?
I think I just flagged my video by saying what I just said. Right now, the algorithm, the YouTube algorithm's just
Yeah, well,
what?
YouTube's never gonna watch the YouTube trust and safety, whatever they're called. They don't really sit down and watch these videos.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
think I'll be all right. If I was a much larger personality or had a much larger presence, that they would pay attention to it.
yeah,
And we could go. Okay, so I want to ask you two more questions. We're not going to get to some of the stuff I wanted to talk about because I don't want this to go too long. I think an hour roughly is good. And clearly, I'm going to have you back,
sure,
if that's okay with you.
absolutely.
So I think we'll end with Armenian Christmas because I'm going to put that in the title of this, like the Armenian Christmas special,
Sure.
plus Nagorno Karabakh or something like that. But I want to know, since you follow, current politics, et cetera. One of the things I brought up in one of my videos was apparently, well, I know China has a huge potential investment in Yerevan, a cyber city, high tech, 1 point something billion dollar potential investment. And apparently George Soros had some money in Pashinyan, or Pashinyan is apparently taking money from George Soros. What is your take on that?
Um, I don't know about the Soros stuff. Definitely China is and has tried to invest into Armenia. I know there was a number of years ago, they just donated a bunch of buses to Armenia. And the cyber city stuff is things I've heard and read about. I would say it makes sense for the Chinese politically, regardless of what you think about them, right? Like I'm just kind of plainly thinking, hey, listen, Russia's got a presence in this region. They're a big superpower. Russia, China's a superpower in the world, like it or not. And they're going to want their presence in that region because they really have none. And it makes sense for China to say, hey, we'll support you guys technologically and all this stuff and get their foothold in Armenia. I'm not very sure. I don't know what the China Iranian relations are. That could play a factor into this as well. And I'm trying to remember the second part of the Soros stuff. Listen, Soros has all sorts of foundations all across the world. As a matter of fact, I was in conversations with some friends, and they've said, "Oh, there's this foundation that we can get money from." And I was like, "Oh, what is it?" And they told me the name, and I just did a basic search, and I was like, "Oh, wait, this is a Soros Foundation." So I don't know. I don't know whether for sure I can guess that there's a lot of organizations that take money because it's free money being offered and without knowing where it's coming from and stuff. And later on, it could be said, "Oh, look at this guy. He took money from Soros," and the guy had no idea. He just took a bunch of free money that was given to him because he filled out some paperwork and got it. Or it could be more serious than that, more in the sense of, hey, this guy's actually. I tend to be clear-minded. At least I like to think so when it comes to some of these conspiracy theories stuff. I don't necessarily have an issue with people with lots of power and money trying to get their worldview and ideology out there in various means. Why don't I have an issue with that? Because that's exactly what I would do if I had a bunch of money.
Yep.
That's just very simple. Would I establish organizations that are preaching the gospel all over the place? Yes, absolutely. I absolutely would.
My investments would go all through that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, could someone who's completely on the other side, an individual who's completely on the liberal side of whether you think about that politically or even theologically, I consider even atheists on the liberal side of theology. But yeah, I don't see necessarily anything wrong with it. Do I like it? No, not necessarily. I don't like the fact that in Armenia there was a bunch of there was conversations about changing the school books. There was conversations about bringing in pro-LGBTQ stuff. No, I don't like any of that stuff because number one, I don't think Armenia culturally and as a society accepts that stuff. And two, what I call it is I call that liberal imperialism, pretty much, right? It's there, and it's not like there's people in there and there's a large group saying, yeah, we want this, we just don't have the funds for it or something like that. It's just that there's virtually no one, right? And it's being superimposed onto the culture. This is the way to be. And America tried to do this stuff with some African nations pushing abortion. Oh, we won't give you funding if you guys don't accept abortion.
Yeah.
And some of those African countries told them, we don't want your money.
Yep.
Back off.
Yep.
Hey, good for them. That's the way it should be. So I don't like it. But does it make sense that these very powerful and wealthy individuals would be trying that stuff in Armenia? Yeah, I absolutely see that stuff happening. And I think it's normal. If I by normal, I don't mean okay, or I agree with it. I think it's the norm of human interaction in the world.
And yeah, and I tried to make the case myself in a video I did that, just having money associated with someone like that doesn't mean you're in that person's, you're in that person's pocket. Even though I kind of clickbaity titled my video is Pashinyan in the pocket of a terrorist regime. Sure, there are forces in the world that have nefarious motives, but it doesn't mean that you still aren't an independent actor, right? You can take that money and still do good with it. And
yeah, I see. So there could be ignorance in there. There could be kind of knowing and saying, well, it doesn't really affect me. I don't have a personal connection with this guy, and I'm going to take the funds or whatever like that. And you've seen this. You see this in American politics. You see it all across the world. And then you also see like, oh, this guy took money from this guy, but he was a completely different at the time he took the money. Yeah. And then 15 years later, he's a completely different guy, and they say, oh, this guy took money from that guy, and it's like, well, yeah, he wasn't that guy, right? Like
by association.
Yeah, it's so I just don't pass judgments very quickly of those sorts. Not that I don't pass judgment. It's just I think we need to be careful when we do pass judgment. And I think that's biblical in the Christianly way. Jesus said, the measurement you use to judge others will be used against you. And I if I don't have access to information, I say, hey, I don't have access to that information, and this is what I would guess at. If I do have access, then I can better make a better judgment on that.
And we tend to be conspiratorial in nature, like looking for schemes, like everybody's
whenever situations like this happen, you always want to find the reason and to blame someone.
Yep.
Right. It's like there might be blame. You could blame people by saying, hey, this guy was an uneducated commanding officer. He made stupid decisions that cost individuals their lives, and we've seen that in all sorts of wars and conflicts and all that. We in American politics, we regularly speak about presidents that are war presidents or leaders that are there's individuals that would be amazing leaders, right? But not during conflicts.
Right.
I mean, would Churchill be Churchill if it wasn't for World War II, right? Like,
no, he was
right.
He was pretty much considered a failure up until then. Like he was the Battle of the Dardanelles, right? Like he was on the losing end of that. Like apparently he made some decisions that were catastrophic in that scenario in World War I. I mean, well, he was younger then, so I don't know.
And so I don't know with Pashinyan, would it be, if the conflict wasn't there, what would history look like? We don't know. We will never know.
There's plenty of corruption within Armenia, aside from George Soros throwing that name around. There's plenty of very wealthy Armenians who are fleecing their own people for their own self.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so yeah, Christmas. Let's cover Christmas.
All right. Let's finish with this. Tell me why.
Listen, one of the things that I mentioned this on Sunday at our church. I'm not an individual that calls this day. I try not to the best of my abilities, because sometimes I don't, and people think I'm being anti-Armenian or something, and I'm really not. This day is not Armenian Christmas, okay? Armenians celebrate it, and Armenians don't just celebrate it as Christmas. As a matter of fact, the proper greeting on this day, translated into English, would be Christ is born and revealed. Okay. And then people will say, blessed be the revelation of Christ. And then there's another secondary kind of greeting, the ending to this greeting is this. So let me say the whole thing. Christ is born and revealed to you and to us, a great big news, right? Or good news, or gospel, avetis in Armenian, right? Which means herald.
Can you say the whole thing in Armenian?
In Armenian, yeah. Let me switch languages in my head, okay? Christos ծնավ եւ հայտնեցավ ձեզի մեզի մեծ avetis. Okay, Dzezi, Mezi, that's to you, to us. Great big news, herald of good news. Avetis is, my son's name is Avetis, by the way. My firstborn's name is Avetis, and it's so tied in with the gospel and also Armenian culture.
Yes.
So it's the celebration of the revelation of the Son of God. It's what is commonly known in Christian calendar for Orthodox and for Catholics is the day of Epiphany. Here's something a lot of people don't know, right? There's 12 days of Christmas. Well, start counting, by the way. Where do you end up? If you start counting on the 24th and 25th, you're going to end up on the 5th and the 6th. And so that's the day of Epiphany. This is something that all Christians should celebrate. Now, within the Armenian Apostolic Church, this day is celebrated as not only the birth of Christ and the visitation of the Magi, but it's also celebrated as the baptism of Jesus. Again, the revelation of the Son of God. And it's a wonderful and beautiful holiday. Being in the West, it's always weird. Being in Armenia, you just celebrate this day. People don't celebrate Christmas, right? Like from the Roman Catholic calendar, we could say. Being in America, especially as a Protestant, it's, you get pulled by both sides. And I've looked at it and I said, wait, hang on. I don't need to reinvent anything. The Christians celebrate this entire season. We don't just celebrate I'm talking about actual Christian celebration. We don't just celebrate 24th, 25th, and we're done.
Right.
There's this 12 days. There's this whole, even up to Christmas, the whole Advent season. There's so much richness, again, coming to us from our Christian tradition, or traditions, we would say. And then it culminates here on the 5th and the 6th, this day of Epiphany. You want to call it Armenian Christmas, that's fine. I think, Christ is for the world. It's not just for Armenians. And I hope Armenians get that kind of in the sense of God's called us even as Christians, but it's for the world. We want the gospel to go out for the world, not just to us. Christianity, this gift of Jesus, is not something we hang on to and hold on to ourselves. It is for us to share with the entire world. So yeah, that's where we're at. It is, and it's wonderful. It's beautiful. We gather with our families. I had dinner with very close family members yesterday.
Technically, this is the end of the Christmas season.
That's right. Yeah.
End, right. It's like the 12 days ends on January 6th.
That's right. Yeah.
You've educated me somewhat. I mean, in my church Sunday, my pastor was saying this, we're still in Advent, right? He was saying, we're still in Advent. We're still in that season.
That's right.
It's a rich history and rich traditions that the Western church is, let's get together and one day Jesus was born. Jesus was born like in June or something like that. Born on December 25th. It's just a day that we picked, a season that we picked, just to bring remembrance. But we should be celebrating the birth of Christ every moment of every day.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, this is the gift. I just think about John the Baptist's lines when he sees Jesus and says, "Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world." That is not something that any Christian should look past, because that is who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And it's we miss the point sometimes. We get caught up. One of the things I did this year that I haven't done before, preaching wise, was I did a preaching all through the Advent season. So every Sunday we actually went through the Revised Common Lectionary, and I did preaching on those Sundays. Nice. And because Christmas was not on a Sunday, so I switched that over to be on a Sunday. And then this past Sunday, I did Epiphany, which is today's readings I did on Sunday, and preached through that and kind of ended that series of sermons I did, because we really think in very short kind of segments and to continuously reflect. This should be a season where we're reflecting on the person of Jesus, what that means for us, what that means for our families, what that means for our, husbands, wives, children, what that means for our society and culture, right? And what that's going to look like as a Christian witness from our perspective to those who are not Christians, and even those who are hostile and enemies to Jesus, and even to us, right? What does it look like for us to say we want to love our enemies? And what does that look like for Armenians to say Jesus has commanded us to love our enemies, given the current circumstances? And how do I reflect on God loved us while we were yet his enemies? So that again, when I talk about apologetics, that's Christian worldview formation right there. And those are struggles. Those are genuine struggles for me, right? In my heart, that's one of the things that I've been struggling with is, how can I be bold? How can I be truthful and seek justice and love my people at the same time love those who are my enemies? Not because I want them to be my enemies, but because they want to be my enemies.
Right. And it's hard. I think this is a perfect place to wrap up, because that to me is further evidence of the supernatural, right? Just the very idea of loving your enemies. That's not a human conception. Like, how could anybody come up with that? What possible gain, what possible benefit is there to any human in an evolutionary paradigm, like loving your enemies? No, you're supposed to kill your enemies so that you can survive, right? Or your enemy will kill you. No, you lay down your life, and set aside all of your offenses, everything, because there's more to this life, right? It's this supernatural. It's like, oh, wait a minute. The world is not the way we think it is. Mm-hmm. And God has revealed himself to us in not just his written word, but in our hearts, right? When we hear the truth, it resonates. And it doesn't resonate with something like loving your enemy. That's outside of myself. But when you do it, God reveals himself to you. That's like right. when you submit to that truth, it's like, there's something I know that is right about loving my enemies. And let me just wrap with this last thought. First of all, thank you, Arthur, and I'm definitely
Thanks for having me on, man.
Back if you are willing. God said to Abraham that he would bless all nations through him, right? Abraham is that common, like God picked someone. He says, I'm going to come to this world and demonstrate how humans should live their lives. It's coming. And Abraham, it's going to be through you. And once that is revealed, all nations will be blessed. And that's not just Abraham's descendants, the children of Israel, and not just that cult of believers that followed this guy Jesus around, of the way, this cult, this Jewish cult called the Way, now has 2.4 billion adherents on the planet. But it's for our Muslim brothers and sisters. It's for our Hindi brothers and sisters. It's for our atheist brothers and sisters. It's like, you are welcome to come. The world is blessed because of what Jesus did. Everything, like the West, the civilization, the Constitution of the United States of America. I believe these are divinely inspired concepts that force us to live in harmony with each other, so that we're not hating each other because of our differences, right? Ethnic differences are like dog breeds. All dogs are the same in nature, in essence. All humans are the same in nature and essence. The things we have in common exponentially outweigh the differences we have. All right, I could go on that tangent, but why don't you give us a final thought? I know I didn't prep you for this, but we'll go out with this. First of all, go to his channel and subscribe, and subscribe here while you're here and share these videos. Arthur, signing off.
My final thought would be this, going off of that, by the way, the whole Abraham is the father of many nations and is the father of faith according to the book of Romans and what Paul writes. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is found in the book of Revelation. It kind of culminates human history. And it says that the kingdoms of this world have now become the kingdom of our God and our Lord Jesus Christ. And And when we talk about these matters, as close as they are to our hearts, and as we should and we ought to seek justice and all of that, the reality is that we won't find true unity, true oneness as humans, as individuals, as cultures and societies, unless that is in the kingdom that is to come and the kingdom that has already come and is expanding. And that is the kingdom of Jesus. And so I invite all my Armenian brothers and sisters, all my American brothers and sisters, all my Azeri brothers and sisters, all my Turkish brothers and sisters, to come and join us and become members of this family, the family of Jesus Christ. And so that when that, not if that, when that statement becomes a reality, that the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our God and our Lord Jesus Christ, that you will actually be able to participate in that for eternity. And you will be covered by the grace of God.
Amen. That's good preaching, Arthur. Thank you.
Thank you.